Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to be discussing the Twin Towers antenna that sat on top of the North Tower, making it taller than the South Tower, identifying it as the North Tower, and we're going to be talking about what happened to the antenna, some hypotheticals surrounding it in terms of that fateful day during the attacks, and also what I think about the new One World Trade Center antenna. I actually had an interesting thing brought up on my Discord. If you guys are interested, I am going to drop a link to my Discord. We do have a tragedy channel. It's a smaller community, my private Discord community, where we discuss, September 11th related things within that channel. And a lot of my Discord members have actually brought up some great points. They've given me some nice photos. So if you want to join that community, I will leave a link. I'll have to pin the link in the description because Discord is weird. You can only have a link active for like 3 days. But either way, when it comes to the antenna, Two World Trade Center or the South Tower also technically could have housed an antenna. They were building around it to where it definitely would have been able to hold an antenna just like the North Tower. And it's funny, whenever you do an AI rendering of the Twin Towers, well, the first thing you'll get is it'll be like, they'll say, oh, we've detected, a bad result. We're not going to be able to show you this because it has to do with September 11th. But if you get around it and word it properly, the AI will routinely put antennas on both of the Twin Towers. It's something that's kind of interesting that always does that. But Two World Trade Center did have the foundation for a potential broadcast antenna, which was never installed. And Two World Trade Center had the top area, the observation deck that you could explore. It was routinely known as kind of the more tourist type tower. One World Trade Center was the more elite type tower with the Windows on the World restaurant located high up in the 106th and 107th floors. The antenna was utilized for radio, TV, and other communications, and they simply didn't need to put another antenna onto the South Tower. The North Tower had enough space within it to broadcast all the TV stations and all the other commercial antennas, so there was never one that was installed into the South Tower, and they were able to turn that into an observation deck. Now, when it comes to the antenna in relation to the attacks, there really is some disturbing video. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but, when you watch the North Tower fall, if you just focus on the antenna, there's something very dark about it. It almost feels like an amusement park ride that's dropping so fast. Like, at Cedar Point, there was the demon drop, something that just falls really fast. Like, if you're just focusing on the antenna, it's a very disturbing image when it falls. And there's also the hypothetical, let's say somebody got onto the roof of the North Tower. Obviously, it was not possible considering all of the smoke and the fact that the doors to the roof were locked. But let's just say in a hypothetical scenario, someone was able to accomplish it, get onto the roof, and cling onto the antenna. Is it possible to try and ride the antenna down to the base as the North Tower is collapsing and survive it? I would say it would be extremely unlikely. As you can see, this is what the antenna looks like today. In the museum, it is an absolute mangled mess. Half of it isn't even there. They do have parts of it displayed in other places, but that is the main part of the antenna. You can just see how massive it is. It's very hard to scale an antenna when it's on top of a huge building like the North Tower, but that is what it looks like. It's just, the one word that I would describe it, it's mangled. It's just completely mangled. It's a total mess, and it fell, and technically, it was the last thing to remain in terms of the entirety of the Twin Towers, because the South Tower falls, everything gets destroyed within it. The North Tower falls, the antenna was the last thing as it fell to remain intact until it hit the ground or hit the base. That's kind of a weird observation, but I don't know. I just kind of do that sometimes. I think about weird stuff like that. So technically, the antenna was the final remaining piece of the Twin Towers to still be operational or still be not broken until it did hit the base. We don't exactly know where it fell because there's just too much smoke surrounding it. I mean, at that point, the South Tower had already fallen, the North Tower was falling, and smoke was kicking up everywhere, so we don't know exactly how the antenna fell to the ground, but we can just see where it is now completely mangled. And I also had someone mention on my Discord wondering, they messaged me and they said, imagine if the new One World Trade Center antenna was on the old North Tower. And I said, I think it would be very, very strange because the old Twin Towers were not modern buildings. That's a modern antenna you can see on the North Tower right there. Another thing, I've been getting some photos sent to me just looking at the new Freedom Tower and just how big the base is compared to the Twin Towers. To me, it just looks so much, the base of it looks so much bigger than the Twin Towers were, and that is a much more modern antenna. Something like that would never work on top of one of the Twin Towers because, again, it's just distorted. It's a modern antenna on top of an old building. It would look completely out of place. When you're talking about the idea, and I've mentioned this before, of building another Freedom Tower, I just don't think it's possible. The building is just too big. It's too girthy, in my opinion, when it comes to that. But guys, that is just the story of the antenna. They could have easily also installed an antenna onto the South Tower. They didn't need to do it, though. The North Tower was able to handle everything in terms of the radio communications and such. And then it comes down, and parts of it did survive, but it was a complete mangled mess. Not surprised, obviously, considering the disaster that it was involved in. But that is just the situation surrounding the roof of the North Tower, the antenna. It did make it, the tallest building there for a short period. Whether or not you want to include antennas in terms of counting how tall a building is, I think that's kind of stupid. Now, in terms of like north versus south, some people wanted them to be, exactly twins, meaning there would be an antenna on both or, no antenna on either of them. Personally, I like the antenna a lot. It signifies the North Tower, so everyone knows which one that is. And also, it just looks a little bit better in the skyline than it being completely naked. Although you could argue, maybe it'd be a little bit more clean. I do remember that one news shot that they had on September 10th. I did a video on September 10th, the day before, and you could see, there was a news clip, and you could see the top of the antenna, it would light up with that red light. Imagine if that red light was on during the actual attacks. I mean, it's just crazy to think about. And that right there, that's a good representation of what I mean when you're talking about having a twin next to the Freedom Tower. The tower itself is just too girthy to have a twin right next to it. To me, it looks a little bit distorted, almost like it's too fat, in terms of one being located right next to another. Here's a really nice image. You can see the antenna looks really nice lit up there, almost like they had spotlights on top of the roof of the North Tower lighting up the antenna at night in this image. That looks really nice right there. This is an interesting aerial perspective shot from up above. You can see both of the towers did have helicopter pads. I was told several different times only the South Tower had a pad because it would kind of make sense with the North Tower having the big antenna. Landing next to that thing would be very challenging, but apparently both of them did have helicopter pads, although the pads were basically completely unutilized later in its life, especially in the 80s, 90s. There was really no need for any helicopter landings on top, and if one was going to happen, it would be on the South Tower because you do have the massive antenna complicating landing on the North. But guys, that is just the breakdown of the antenna, where it is today. Yes, it is still in existence. I guess technically, although it is a mangled mess, it's about 1/10 of the height that it previously was based on the fact that it fell very far. But that is going to do it for this video, guys. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.